Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. My report is about the general analysis of by the Russian researchers' point of view, of the hagiographies of Tamil mystic saints, the Nayanars and the Alvars, whose religious and poetic traditions, as we all know very well, flourished approximately from the 6th up to the 12th centuries in the South India. My beloved teacher, Alexander Mikhailovich Dubyansky, in whose memory this conference is, he published a book, which is a short essay in Russian language called Tamil Literature. And we, all his students, actually were brought up using this book and loved it very much. And in that book, there is a section, a quite short section. It is 23 pages only, but a very capacious one. And it is dedicated to the works of bhakti poets. In that section, he identified and outlined a certain typology of the bhakta's life path reflected by tradition. This mainly concerns the Nayanar tradition, and this typology was based on some key episodes and situations of their life stories. Of course, the hagiographic image of almost every bhakta, if you look at it through the prism of medieval thinking, it was much determined by the canon on the one hand, and on the other hand, it is endowed with the features of certain individuality. Still, the similarity of situations and models of religious behavior is also noticeable. And based on this similarity and a number of constant motives of the life stories and works of the Nayanars, Alexander Mikhailovich Dubyansky identified the most general basic typology. As he wrote, and this is my translation from my teacher's writing, English translation. Bhakti saints are usually characterized by the following. The first point is so-called chosenness, an unexpected but significant meeting with God who often takes on earthly form, seeking and testing his chosen one. The second point is internal spiritual transformation, the emergence or strengthening of an inexplicable attraction to Shiva or Vishnu. In some cases, the renunciation of the previous faith and complete submission to God. The next one is abandonment of habitual social connections, forgetting one's responsibilities, going into asceticism, and sometimes the end of marriage. The next one is God's wonderful support of his adept, of course. And finally, a universal and extremely important point in the typology of the image of a bhakta, as my teacher writes, is poetic insight, the gift of spontaneous verbal outpouring of religious emotions, as an opportunity to serve God by singing hymns in his glory. And the purpose of my report is to take this Alexander Dubyansky typology as a basis to continue the research and somewhat develop its ideas, in connection with which I want to share some observations. Okay. Next slide. So the study is generally based on hagiographical material of the both traditions, the 63 Nayanars. This is Secular's Peria Puranam, and of course the Devaram, the core of Tirumurai canon, and the Tiruvasaham by Manikkavasahar. The sources of the Alvar's tradition are mostly hagiographical works created by Madhura Kavi and the poetry of the canon Divya Pirapandam. I also used one book by Dr. Vijaya Lakshmi, which my teacher once presented me in the early 2000s. And that book helped me a lot. I was using it as a guide book on academic level. In general information about the Nayanars and the Alvars, because I had quite great difficulty in reading original Tamil, for example, Periya Puranam, the hagiographies. It's a big problem to read it in original, as it was for me. So the first observation of the typology is regarding the meeting with God Shiva or Vishnu, who often tests his chosen one. The motive of testing, moreover a cruel test, is almost not characteristic of the Alvar tradition, but it is very characteristic of the Nayanar tradition, where bhaktas have situations in which they sacrifice their lives, parts of their bodies, the lives of loved ones, and parts of their bodies for the sake of love for Shiva, not to mention material wealth. This is often associated with the phenomenon of Vannanbu in Tamil, which we can translate as approximately as cruel love for God, which was rooted in the Shaivite tradition. Out of the 63 hagiographies of the Nayanars, we have 15 explicit examples with different tests of them performed by God, and out of them 16 are very cruel, reflecting Vannanbu. So in total we have 31 cases. It is also worth noting here that the hagiographies of the other 26 Nayanars do not reveal such motives. These are, relatively speaking, neutral bhaktas who simply love God Shiva and live righteously, worship him, performing rituals. Therefore, here we can conclude that the motive of testing and Vannanbu does not apply to a very large part of the life stories of the Nayanars. The next one. The next point is inner spiritual transformation. It is a universal, indisputable position in the Bhakta typology. But there are some nuances here. Of course, it can be stated more clearly about spiritual transformation and its features when it is manifested not so much in life stories, but in the poetry of a Bhakta. For example, the poetry by Appar, Sundarar, Manikavasahar, Karaikala Meyar, and so on. And much less certainly we notice the process of such spiritual transformation in the cases where we have no poetry by the bhaktas at all, or it has not been preserved for us to study it. These moments of the spiritual transformation are very well traced, especially in the penitential motives of the hymns of such saints as Manikavasahar and Appar. And this is even more clearly visible if the poet previously belonged to another religion, for example, was a Jain or a Buddhist. Usually those who, according to hagiography, have such a story also mention it in their works. And here the striking example is Appar's poetry. In the case of Sambandar, whose figure is equated in tradition with the status of Messiah, to whom Shiva appeared when the saint was only 3 years old, he did not have any spiritual transformation at that age, of course, which is confirmed, by the way, by the contents of his poetry. And the penitential motives usually seen in the hymns of the bhaktas, such as Manikava Saharapara Sundarar, they are not found in Sambandar's hymns. As for breaking social ties, this is the next point, including the cessation of family life. Among the lives of the Nayanars and the Alvars, there are only a few such examples. Out of the 63 Nayanars, there were only 2 Nayanars who were sannyasins and yogis. One of them is famous Tirumular, and the other one is Urutti Pasupati Nayanar. Karai Kalamayar also demonstrates the most divine path in rejecting social norms. We can say transforming her appearance into a demoness pay. But as for family life, Karai Kal herself, while still being Punidavadi, the wife of a merchant's son, she did not reject it the first because after her mystical meeting with Lord Shiva, her husband was the first to leave her, believing that she was a goddess and could not be the wife of a mere mortal man, according to her life story. Another interesting example is from the Perya Puranam, in the hagiography of the saint Tirunilakandar, who had a very interesting situation. He, while formerly married, lived for many years, so to speak, without touching his wife, because out of anger at him, his wife wanted it that way. And so they lived to old age, but after many years, Shiva appeared to this Nayanar in a guise of a devotee. And as a regard for long abstinence and thoughts of Shiva, as a result of one lila created by Shiva, God gave him and his wife eternal youth so that they could enjoy their family relationships, although as it seems they didn't ask about it themselves. Based on this hagiography, as well as the overwhelming majority of others, we can conclude that the tradition of the Nayanars and the Alvars rather encouraged family life in the spirit of Brahmanic traditions, and this did not run counter to the spiritual transformation of the Bhakta. This transformation was experienced mainly internally on the psychological level, but outwardly, a Bhakta could live a seemingly worldly life. It is interesting that sometimes the family life of a Bhakta could be too oversaturated and stormy. And here we have a vivid example of Sundarar, who, according to his life story, had 2 spouses, Parave and Sangile, and due to quite difficult family relationships, resentments, quarrels, when the poet had problems, Shiva, out of love for him, himself acted as a mediator so that, for example, to reconcile him with one of his Sundarar's consorts. So at the level of the hagiographic tradition, there is no condemnation of not only the worldly relationships of bhaktas, but Shiva even shows mercy when these relationships are completely problematic and devoid of righteous well-being. As for mediation of God to his bhaktas in worldly affairs, it of course manifests itself not only in family situations. The motive of the problematic relationship between a bhakta and a king is quite noticeable here. It is demonstrated in both traditions, the Nayanars and the Alvars. As an example, we have Manikavasahar, when Lord Shiva supported him and appeared to the king in the guise of a merchant instead of Manikavasahar. So God helped him to conduct his worldly duties. And we have another example with Tirumalasi, Alvar and Vishnu, as God's Murti left the temple and left with the poet after the king kicked out the poet for refusing to serve him. I'll stress it again that in general, in the hagiographic tradition demonstrates that in the majority of cases, the bhaktas outwardly lead everyday worldly life, fulfilling family responsibilities, engaging in one or another activity, some craft, etc. And on this slide, you can see the chart of the social positions and activities of the Nayanars. And I repeat once again that out of the 63 Nayanars, only 2 were full sannyasins. Uttira Pasupati, who stood in a pond all his life and chanted a mantra, and the famous Tirumular, who generally lived in someone else's body, the body of a shepherd, and performed asceticism under a banyan tree. Not only the life stories, but also the poetry of some bhaktas confirm their seemingly external immersion in worldly life. In the hymns of the Devaram collection, addressed primarily to an audience of ordinary lay people, the poet Sambandar glorifies worldly life and daily work and family traditions. And all this does not in any way contradict with nature of Shiva if imbued with his grace. According to the quote by Alexander Dubyanskiy, a universal and extremely important point in the typology of the image of a bhakta is poetic insight, the gift of spontaneous verbal outpouring of religious emotions as an opportunity to serve God by singing hymns. And this is very important observation from my teacher. However, clarification is required here regarding the universality of such a moment. If we take the images of the 63 Nayanars in the Periya Puranam and all the works of by the Nayanars that have come down to us in the poetic canon of Tirumurai, then we can see that out of the 63 Nayanar saints, only 27 were poets. And this is less than half of the Nayanars. It turns out that the level of evidence from written sources available to us, the point of poetic gift is significant, but still not generally universal. Although it is impossible to accurately verify this in the Nayanar tradition in any case, it could also be that all the saints spontaneously created and sang hymns to Shiva, but the works written by the majority of them has never reached us, and we don't have written mentions of it, except for canonized ones, 27 authors. In general, this issue requires further research, and it is important to outline it now. Much simpler and clearer in this sense is the situation in the tradition of the 12 alvars, and they all have left behind poetic creativity. That is, in relation to the alvars, the statement about the typological universality of the poetic gift is 100% true. Now I shall say a few more words about the distinctive features of the hagiographies of the Nayanars on the one hand and the alvars on the other. For example, there is a point associated with the reincarnation of a bhakta, indicating that he could once had been a being from the mythological environment of God in the heavenly world, but due to one or another reason of his karma, he was forced to incarnate on earth as an outstanding bhakta. In the life stories of the Nayanars, such references are found infrequently. One might say they are closer to exceptions. One example is that Sundarar and his 2 wives were once inhabitants of Shiva Loka, Sundarar being in the retinue of Shiva and the 2 women in the retinue of goddess Parvati. According to legend, when Sundarar saw these 2 servants of Parvati in the celestial grove, he fell in love with them, and due to karma, the 3 were forced to incarnate on earth, outlive the karma of their relationships there, and then they returned to Shivaloka. It is characteristic of the hagiographic tradition of the alvars that almost each of the alvars is considered the embodiment of the sacred attribute of God Vishnu. And this is interesting point. And on this slide, you can see the list of their so-called incarnations. So here we can see that Kulasekara Alvar once was Kaustubha, precious stone of Vishnu, Tirumangi Alvar, the bow of Vishnu, Tondaradipudi, garland of Vishnu, Vijayanti, Namalvar, Kaustubha, and also partial avatar of Vishnu. He is considered Tirupanalvar, the embodiment of the knot of happiness, so-called knot of happiness, or Srivatsa. Periyalvar, the embodiment of Vishnu's Vahana Garuda. Poihei is Panchajanya conch, Bhuta Kaumodaki mace of Vishnu. And Peyalvar is considered as embodiment of the sword of Vishnu, Nandaka. So as we see, the souls of these bhaktas were sacred objects and even mythological mount of Vishnu, God Vishnu. In the Shaivite Nayanar tradition, a similar pattern generally is not observed. Also, the Alvars had an idea of the holy partial avatar of Vishnu, as you can see, which was Namalvar. Among the Nayanars, we do not see partial avatars of Shiva. A kind of exception is Samvandar saint, who is considered the incarnation not of Shiva, but of Skanda Murugan, the son of Shiva. The next one. A separate interesting topic is that of female bhaktas, of whom there are only a few in the both traditions. In the Shaivite tradition of 63 Nayanars, there are only 3 women. They are Sundarar's mother, Isenani. The second one is the Pandyan king, the Pandyan queen, Mangiyar-Karasi, and the main saint, the poetess Karaikal Ameyar. The Alvars have the poetess Andal. They are very well-known and famous one. The construction of a typology of female bhaktas is a separate topic and deserves a separate report. However, we can conditionally divide these images into 2 types. The bhaktas of the first of them, such as the mother of Sundarar and Queen Mangeyar-Karasi, seem not to stand very much out for special feats in their spiritual life. I would say they are simply ladies who love God and live righteously. The second group consists of outstanding saints with vividly memorable and striking life stories, such as Karaikala Mayar and Andel. And here we can highlight a general point related to how the legendary image of a female bhakta is understood by the religious and philosophical traditions of the Shaivites and the Vaishnavites. In both traditions, these bhaktas at the level of myth and or legend achieve the divine status of the feminine energy of God. The key legend of the life of Karaikal is that in the guise of the demoness Pei, she made a pilgrimage to Kailash mountain, walking on her hands, and Shiva greeted her with the words, "Greetings, mother," and she greeted him with "Greetings, father." Thus, at the level of religious and philosophical symbolism, Shiva's replica gives Karaikal the status of the universal mother, corresponding to the ontological role of Shiva himself as the father of the universe, and conditionally includes the female bhakta in the basic religious and philosophical dichotomy of Shiva Shakti. And in a sense, the female bhakta is close to the status of goddess. A similar thing is observed with the Andal, whose husband is Vishnu Krishna himself, and the episode of their wedding is reflected in her work Tirupavi. By the tradition, she is revered as a hypostasis of the Tamil spouse of Vishnu Napini, and in the northern tradition, it is the goddess Bhudevi as a hypostasis of Lakshmi. And very brief, I'm sorry for being maybe too my report may be too long, but very brief. The last point, I want to say, if we approach the typology of Tamil practice from a different angle, then in the Tamil tradition, we can identify the beginnings of another form of the typology based on the types of relationships between the bhaktas and God. In late northern traditions of bhakti, and primarily the cult of Krishna, a number of treatises appear that consolidate such relationships already at the level of theoretical understanding, and so-called the theory of bhavas. And numerous bhakti theorists, as Vallabhacharya, Vithalnath Rup, etc., argued that there are four main types of bhaktas' love for God Krishna. You can see them on the slide. So it is Dasya Bhav, slavish feeling, Sakya Bhava or friendly feeling, Vatsalya Bhava or parental feeling, and Madhurya Bhava, the feeling of love of a woman for her lover. And in the earliest emotional bhakti tradition, which is Tamil, we do not see such a harmonious theoretical classification. However, the lives and works of some Tamil bhaktas demonstrate the elements of these types of bhaktas' relationship to God. In the Nayanar tradition, the vast majority of saints demonstrate Dasya Bhav. And we have a very common epithet of a bhakta in Tamil, tonder or al, slave. And a striking example of such an attitude towards God is found in Saint Apar's poetry. The unique relationship between Shiva and the bhakta we see in Sambandar's hagiography is that of a father and son. And it is noteworthy that in the further northern history of bhakti, the main theory of bhavas, this type of feeling for God as a son has for his father is not highlighted. Also, in the works of bhakti, we often find an appeal to God as Father Yende. Elements of Madhurya Bhava, feeling for God as a beloved, are found in the majority of poetry by both the Nayanars and the Alvars, who use the poetics of ancient Tamil lyrics aham. This can include canonical imagery and the use of the Tinei poetic system and genre forms such as the message poem to the beloved. It should be emphasized that in the work of the main Nayanar poets, the elements of attitude towards Shiva as Lord, lover, and comrade are often intertwined, mixed with each other, but one of the other will dominate anyway. So I'll be brief. It is interesting that manifestations of the paternal attitude towards Shiva as a child are not found in the works of the Nayanars, but it is clearly presented in relation to Vishnu Krishna in the works of Periyalvar as Vatsalya Bhakti, where the poet identifies himself with the image of Yashoda, the foster mother of Krishna. Okay, I'll stop sharing presentation. And in the end, I want to stress that general observations I wanted to share with you concerning typology of the Tamil Bhakta images. Of course, it needs further research in all Indian Bhakti context, including many regional traditions of emotional Bhakti. And it also can be useful for religious studies in general, all over the world, concerning the typology of a so-called subject of religious cult in different traditions of mysticism. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Maria. Very briefly, if someone probably has questions.
Yeah, I have, if I may, I have a couple of comments. At some point, you mentioned something, I took a photo of it, of Madhura Kaviyarvar. So you had written, maybe it's just a, an issue with English, something about hagiography.
Yes.
Just trying to see. Yes, hagiographical works by Madhura Kavi, he hasn't written any hagiographical works. He's only written 10 verses known as Kanninun Siruthambu. Yes, there are hagiographic elements. He speaks about his teacher. So that's one thing you need to fix.
Okay,
Um,
yes, thank you.
um,
So I quoted Dr. Vijaya Lakshmi's essay on that point. So I have seen the source in her book.
Okay.
This.
Okay, I don't know her work. Maybe she tried to say
Yes,
something
I
else. I
have
don't know.
not seen Tamil original myself. I have seen only, frankly speaking, I have seen only Periyar Puranam in original. Okay, and
Okay.
about Alvars, it is not my exactly my topic. I just use it
Okay.
the brief information.
Yeah.
Thank
And
you.
also about all the weapons, etc., of Vishnu incarnating. That's just not all the acharyas agree. Some of the acharyas say it's just,
Yeah.
to praise them. It's not really the case. They are jivatmas as well. The Eid of Bhagavad Vishayam begins with Namarva being called as Nitya Samsari Ai Ponda Ivarai, for
Yeah.
example, specifically calls Namarva as Nitya Samsari. God picked him. He was a Nitya Samsari, not a Nitya Suri. So there are nuances. Vedanta Deshika has a slightly different view. He thinks that the Acharyas and the Arvas are direct incarnations of God. Not direct, but at least there's a part of him in there. So Acharyas don't agree with that. So maybe it should be a little more nuanced. That's
Yes,
all I
I know.
wanted to
Yes,
point out.
this is a lot of controversies in that
Yeah,
topic. I can understand. Thank you very much for your comment,
yeah,
precious.
yeah, sure.
Okay.